My name is Mike Snell, and on my right is Fiona Macmillan and John Bingham. I'm sure you probably know a lot about all these people, so we want to get right through to the action, as it were, because this is a workshop where hopefully you're going to do some work for us. And it's about the Effective Board project. The plan is to split this roughly an hour into 3 parts. A brief presentation about what the Effective Board project is about, and then getting you working in groups to actually try some of the draft tools that some of us are working on to try and help governing bodies ask the key questions around the key areas. And then we're really looking for some feedback from you as to how useful you found that exercise. I'm told that this is not a good room for questions in the sense of people being heard. So if you want to ask a question and something really urgent, can I suggest, we've got a roving mic, so that will come round. Okay, so that's what this is. If anybody feels they want to go to another workshop as a result of that introduction, then now's the time to go. Okay, great, thanks very much. Okay, so the outcomes, in good teaching style, I hope that you'll have an overview of this project, which has been instigated by ELSIS, and which we expect to hopefully have finished by the end of May. So it's in a draft form. Work with some of the diagnostic tools already developed, and have an opportunity to assess and comment on the usefulness of the tools. And I'm going to make sure that I captured all your emails, and I will follow up with you next week, if that's okay. Don't worry, if you don't want my email, then just don't reply to it. But hopefully some of you will give some further thought to the tools that you've got in front of you, and we'd welcome your feedback. On your table, by the way, you'll find 3 documents, we should do. One is a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, which isn't particularly important. And then there's a fairly glossy, the Effective Board pack, which I hope you will have a good look at, if not during this workshop, then later. And there's a single sheet flyer, yeah, that's the one. And there's a single sheet flyer about the Effective Board. Don't worry, if you haven't got it on your table, it's actually in the conference pack. That's a single sheet. And that gives you some contact details, people that you can get in touch with. Okay, so that's what you've got. Housekeeping, comfort, I think we all know where the loos are by now, hopefully. Evacuation, fire, the blue signs. Chatham House rules, I hope that's okay. I've used these tools already working with a number of governing bodies, but this is the first time we've used the tools with people from different colleges. And I know it's sometimes a little bit awkward, but hopefully you'll agree that it's okay to talk about whatever you want to talk about in the context of your college, in the sense that your table will then get something positive out of it. And I'm going to leave you to make your introductions to each other when we get to the second stage, if that's okay. So introduction, 20 minutes, group work, 20 minutes, feedback, 20 minutes, and we're out of here by 3:15. Well, we've heard it all this morning, so I don't need to say any more. I thought, Asher, well done, brilliant introduction this morning. You don't need me to tell you that the world is changing. We've got new freedoms and flexibilities, lots of opportunities are being offered up, and it's over to governors and colleges, staff and learners actually to get on with it. But there's the list, I would suggest, of all the factors which are influencing colleges at the moment. You could probably add to that. And when this whole question of, do we need yet another set of tools? Do we need something else that's going to go on a website? There's loads of material out there. Why do we need something else to help governing bodies assess themselves more effectively? Well, given that change agenda, just 2 questions perhaps. What are the implications for governance? I think those have been raised this morning. And how can a board effectively evaluate its own performance? Now, what we started with, we tried to set a kind of, I won't say a theoretical framework, but we wanted to base this material, not just in thin air, but base it on something. And we thought, well, we've got the good governance principles of which were produced a few years ago. We thought, well, shall we apply those to further education or the skills agenda? And just to repeat, the good governance practice 6 principles, we started with these, and we actually turned those into something which is directly relevant to further education rather than just the public sector. We felt this was something that the further education and skills sector might buy into. So there's a slight adjustment of the words there. And then we looked at, well, what are the linked themes that come out of each of those principles? And we came up with the following. Understanding the role. What's my role as a governor? Pretty simple stuff, most of this. Delivering the mission and vision. Working effectively as an individual and collectively as a team of governors. Being accountable and managing risk. Acting with integrity. Being an effective critical friend. Being open and transparent. And those are the sort of themes that we identified coming out of the good governance practice principles. And then we looked at, well, what are the priorities that we might look at? And perhaps not surprisingly, we started with teaching, learning and assessment because that's very much on the agenda. I noticed still that that word assessment still tends to get dropped off, doesn't it? So people say governors need to get involved in teaching and learning. Actually, it's teaching, learning and assessment. And it's quite a complex process, I would suggest. Leadership and management, accountability to stakeholders, performance management of the principal, CEO. We didn't just dream these up, by the way. We have a group of critical friends, including principals, former governors, Fiona and John, are both on the critical friends group. So we've shared these notions already at a meeting and by email to see whether we've got the appropriate tools. I hope you'll tell us if there's something that's seriously missing. Performance management generally, as opposed to managing the performance of the principal, CEO and senior staff. Understanding the views of staff, reputation and networking, outcomes for learners, board structure and process, strategic planning. I'll just go back to those before we completely lose them. You'll notice that there's certain things missing there. Finance isn't there. That, in a sense, is quite deliberate because we wanted to focus on the things that we felt probably needed more tools at this stage. But there are 5 or 6 additional tools which are being worked on, and one of those will be finance, because we clearly can't just leave that off the agenda. But those are the priorities that we've been working towards, and you'll see those in the booklet. And we're also very keen, not least because of the sad demise of ELSIS. I wonder actually what is going to fill the very significant gap, which I think is going to be left in terms of all the development work that's going around curriculum, the development work that's going around governance. I wish the new FE Guild well, but it does seem to me that things are shutting down very quickly before we've got something else in place. I wonder who is going to organise next year's conference, for example, and set the agenda. But anyway, I can say these things as someone who's retired and don't worry too much about the politics anymore. But we're very keen to make sure that whatever is produced is linked to existing resources. Just on a hands up, how many people are aware of the AOC Governance Resource Library? I mean, that is brilliant because it's clearly getting around. All of these materials will I beg your pardon?
Some of us are clerks here today.
Yeah.
So you might well know about it.
Yeah, excellent, good. That's great. And clerks, of course, are going to be, key midwives, I think, of this whole sort of process. We're trying to make sure that if anything is being worked on in this project, it can go directly through to other resources which are already in existence. The AOC Governor's Resource Library, if we get a chance at the end, I'll just hyperlink back into that. We know that that's going to exist. There's a lot of really good material on the ELSIS Excellence Gateway. I'm not sure where that's going to be, but it will need to be somewhere because there's a lot of material. And of course, there are lots of materials that are an offset. There's just 3 examples of existing resources. So we're keen that this project should be not just something that's considered to be new and extra, It's actually part of the existing series of resources that are available. Right. What we'd like you to do, I hope this isn't too much of a graveyard session after lunch, is it? Is to work in groups and actually use the diagnostic tools. So if you just look at the pack, you'll see that. Don't worry, I would suggest at this stage, too much about the introduction, but you'll see at the end of the pack, there's a series of single A4 sheets. And you'll see that there's a heading. So if I go back, the priorities for diagnostic tools, you'll see there's a heading, and of those, I think there's 11 of them there. Each tool, are you with me? It's at the back of the booklet, A4 sheets, that's it. It's got draft written all over it. Yeah. You'll see that there's a series of questions, and intentionally, the whole approach of these tools is to ask what are fairly simple questions. Like, so if you look at the performance management tool, which I used literally last weekend with a sixth form college, we started off with the question, what is performance management? And could have spent all day just discussing what that was. And generally speaking, you haven't got more than a few minutes just to work out. So some of the questions are fairly basic. Others of the questions are intended to encourage governors to think very closely about what the role of the governor is, and then to make an assessment about how good that they think they are, individually or collectively, as a governing body, and then to identify what they think they should be doing. Now, 3 of the tools are unashamedly Ofsted related, because we thought what we would do is pick out the key criteria for teaching, learning and assessment, leadership and management, and outcomes for learners, and literally just put the criteria that Ofsted use on the left-hand side and put that in front of governors and say, and ask the question, okay, what is your role in this respect? And when we ask those questions of governing bodies, certainly my experience to date has been you get some really interesting discussion going. Once you get beyond the hurdle that says, well, that's not our job, that's the principal's job, or it's the job of the senior staff, it's very, very interesting, certainly, to date, to see how governors start, well okay, what about progression and employability? What are we supposed to know about that? What are the kinds of questions that we should ask? How should we inform ourselves as governing bodies, if at all? So, deliberately, these tools are fairly simple. They're not intended to be hugely complicated, that take you from one step to another. It's a series of quite straightforward questions, which, with some facilitation, then we encourage you to start having a brief discussion and identify. Sometimes a group of governors may say, well, I don't think we've got anything to do with that at all. On other occasions, you may have a conversation that comes out and says, well, I really think we should do something about this. And you've got the same process that colleges have been doing, of course, for a long time, and a lot of governing bodies have been doing self-assessment reports where you're encouraged to make an evaluative judgment. So how good do we think we are as a governing body in addressing this criterion, which is Ofsted related? How good are we? And then the next bit is, well, what's the evidence for it? What is it that we actually do at the moment to discharge our responsibility? So that's how it works. What we'd like you to do, I'll pause in just a moment, just in case there are any questions before you get going. Can I just finish? I'll come back to you, Asher, in a minute. Rather than say, do tool number 1 or tool number 2, tool number 3, seems a bit didactic to me. If you could just spend a couple of minutes in your group and say, well, let's have a look at this one, that looks quite interesting to me, get an agreement fairly quickly, and then have a conversation around those questions. And what we'd like to do in the limited time available is to get some feedback from each group to say, well, we think this is useless, or we think this is really helpful. This was a key outcome that we had from our discussion around tool number 3, 4, or 5. Asha, sorry, did you want to ask a question?
Just a point I wanted to make. It's a small
understand the views of learners. You're quite right. It's one of the tools that's to come. This is not a complete list, and we'd really like your observations about what are the other priorities for diagnostic tools. So this is not a definitive list, but thank you very much. You're right. Yeah.
I wonder if it's worth actually thinking, you were saying this to me earlier on, I wonder if it's worth thinking about students and learners in relation to each of them. Because in a way, you know, if you have the learner at the centre of your focus, even if you're thinking about, you know, kind of leadership and management or whatever, then actually you aren't straying too far from the core purpose of, you know, of the college, which I think was mentioned this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about, yeah, Jim?
Could you say, Mike, what else is to come? That would be helpful too, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I think we had, I might have to come back to you on that. Definitely the learner voice. Appraisal of chair and other governors is certainly another one. Finance isn't on there yet, and we definitely think there ought to be one on finance. That's 3 of them. Pete, I'll let you know what we've got another 5 on the list at the moment, Jim. I know. Okay. Any other questions? Are you up for it? Yes, please. It would be really helpful if you were. So, in your groups, I'll just repeat in good didactic fashion. It's the old Chinese proverb, isn't it? You know, tell and I forget, show me I may remember, involve me and I will understand. So this is the kind of involve bit. Just like you to have a quick look at each of those tools. Could you quickly agree, let's have a conversation around outcomes for learners, and then look at the questions and see the extent to which you think that would be relevant for you and your governing body. You come from different colleges, different experiences. And then what we'd like is some feedback from each table about the use of those tools. And Fiona, John, and I will circulate to try and keep you on task. Okay, thank you. Right, we've got 20 minutes, so if I could just take perhaps one issue from each table. And we're into being open, so if it was a completely useless exercise, please say that. It's important that we know that. Could we start at that far table over there? Fiona, do you mind using a flip chart? I was just going to capture these. So I'm going to call that table 1 by the camera. Just one bit of feedback. If you could just tell us which tool you looked at. Or none at all, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Okay. Is this? Yes, it's working. Well, basically, we must have found it pretty helpful because I think we covered 1.5 points out of tool 1. I mean, I think that in a way, one of the most important points that came out of our discussion was that yes, the points that are raised under in our case, Tool 1, were undoubtedly helpful to get discussion going. The big question that we are left with, I think, after this short discussion is what kind of help we might need if we were actually having a discussion in our own boards. And I think probably all of us, just looking around, felt that we would need to have some kind of facilitation. Not because it's a bad thing to have a prompting question which opens things out in your minds. Indeed, you can argue you want that to happen. But in order really to kind of then close back down on what's really, really important that we want to do that we're not doing now in our board. So I think that would be possibly the prime point to come out of our discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I mean, a question that we've been asking ourselves throughout this whole process is, can we set this up in such a way that a college could do it on its own? We'd like to do that. But every time we've discussed it with people, and certainly every time I've worked with other governing bodies, they seem to come back, it's useful to have some sort of external facilitation. So thank you for that. Could we come to this table here, the next one, please?
Thank you. With 5 clerks and 1 governor, we thought we'd choose 5, 6 and 7, and I don't think we got anywhere with any of them. But our issue was a lot of performance management, and with the help of your colleague, what does performance management mean? Is it performance management amongst the staff and how the governors set a framework for that, or is it the governor's performance management of the data they get? And that's not clear. We also went into things such as surveys, the role of the principal. Is the principal on the board or not? Because the legislation or way it's written says they can or they can't be. So what's the principal's role as part of the board or presenting the key performance indicators for monitoring amongst the board? And there is the issue, you know, I felt it, is Ofsted the elephant in the room? Because at my college, it's only worth, what they inspect is only 40% of the college. But what I have to say is, looking at the draft, it generates great debate. So, you know, if there are 11 headings or whatever, the questions generate debate, and that's got to be a good starting point.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Certainly, I think on this table, we would come to the conclusion that if you're going to use these tools, and they're not supposed to be the be-all and end-all statement, hopefully, you know, get to question 1, what is performance management? Different colleges would have different responses in just the way that you described it, but hopefully that will generate the right kind of debate, so it is then owned by. It's not something, these are the only questions that have to be asked. It's what are the questions that we need to ask. So thank you, that's really helpful.
Sorry, could I
feedback.
just add, the difficulty
Sure.
we have is that whenever you do performance management, it's about benchmarking and comparisons to see where you actually are. And I think a lot of these issues, success rates are easy. A lot of these issues are hard to benchmark.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that.
I think if I could just add, having sat in that table, I think one of the things that came out of that, which was really useful, was actually there are kind of diagnostic statements that people don't necessarily explore, you know, because you don't always get the opportunity to explore them. So actually understanding, you know, that performance management and thinking about performance management is quite an important thing
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
time to do, isn't it?
Great. Thank you. This table here, please.
Yeah, we looked at Tool 1 as well. And one of the main things that we discussed there was in terms of teacher grading and how, as a governor, we can be assured that we're getting the correct information on teacher grading. Although, with a lot of colleges, we do use other colleges to come in and do the assessment.
Yep.
So there is that element of that confirms our views. But quite often there is a conflict, though, between the assessment you've got for teaching for teacher grading and actual results, which, you know, so you can't necessarily look at one set of data and assume that the answer will be as you're expecting.
Yeah.
And it's a minefield really for governors.
Yeah,
to
it
get
certainly
round.
is. I mean, we had that conversation on another table I was at, and I guess if you're a governor, you've got limited time, you're probably going to be identifying the areas where you think you need to be putting your effort. And presumably you'd be looking at trend lines in areas of the college which were relatively underperforming.
Yeah. And it's how deep you drill down into that information as well.
And the whole, peeling back of the onion and so on and so forth. This tool is intended to get governors asking themselves those questions. Because my response would be, well, I guess in College A, you might need to start peeling down, you might need to start drilling down a lot further than you might need to in College B. So there's not a right answer for every institution, is there?
My concern is if you add another 5 to this, then it'll be a weekend away that we'll need to go through this.
Well, perhaps behind the whole of this is that, you know, if you get people working in groups, involving and discussing things, perhaps they can make as much, if not more, progress than they can sitting for 3 hours around a formal governors' meeting, where you go through agenda 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you read a whole load of reports, and then you go home and feel you've done your work. Perhaps there's something to be said about assessing how much time is spent on formal as opposed to informal governance business. Thank you very much for that feedback. Could you just pass that to the next table there, please? Thank you.
Okay, we did tool 6 on performance management, and just a quick overview. We agreed performance management is about whole college performance, which we thought was important, and it's actually the driver for improving the teaching and learning environment. We also thought it was about using data to identify issues. It's the principal's job then to actually sort these issues. It's our job to hold him or her accountable for actually doing it. And in order to identify the issues, it's about knowledge, it's about robust and probing questions, which is actually key. So robust and probing questions for the management team. It's also about not just relying on data, but actually verifying that data, perhaps by one of the examples quoted was sitting in observations or the training of internal observers. And finally, one of the key things to get governors up to speed is induction of new governors and perhaps coaching and mentoring to make sure they come up to speed quickly.
That's really helpful. But that was generated by the tool, that discussion?
Basically, it was generated by a really good discussion around the tool.
That's great. Thank you. That's, again, very, very helpful. Could you pass that? I'm just going to go to the back, actually, so that we make sure we don't forget.
Okay, we looked at tool 9, outcomes for learners, and a preamble to begin with, because the point that was one of the points that was made is that with some governing bodies, they culturally they probably still are not into self-evaluation and don't recognise the importance of that process, and that they think that self-evaluation is for the college and not for the governors.
Yeah,
so the
point.
recognition of the importance of governance self-evaluation culturally is important in itself. So I think that's a basic but important starting point. Certainly the diagnostic tool generated a very interesting discussion around the table, although we do find trying to fit it into the boxes a bit frustrating and a bit constraining. But I guess it's the thought process that really matters. But outcomes for learners and the role of governors, I think in the final analysis, it is about scrutinising outcomes and impacts. Somebody put it, one of the group participants put it in a very interesting way, that the fundamental question in this, as in other areas, is whether governors add value. The only problem is methodologically, how do you compare a situation that exists with one that doesn't exist and will never exist? Well, where to put it crudely, the governors simply won't be there. But at the end of the day, governors are there to add value. And I say, therefore, scrutinising and monitoring the data, which is not necessarily just quantitative, it may also be qualitative, it will depend. But not just that, and not just asking questions, but being willing, at the end of the day, to ask uncomfortable questions, if that is warranted. And if governors are asking uncomfortable questions, but appropriately briefed, in a knowledgeable and constructive way, then they should be adding value. But in particular, where the quantitative data is pertinent, it will be the trend data. That's the key to it in terms of outcomes and impacts.
Thank you. I mean, you've raised a whole series of points there, which we haven't got time to go into, but I really like that notion of raising uncomfortable questions, being a critical friend.
Yes.
And I think on another table, we were talking about being emotionally intelligent, about how you actually exercise that critique.
Yes.
Because there have been colleges, haven't there, where governors don't get the information that they need, essentially because the senior management team have stopped giving it to them.
Yes.
And you then have to ask the question, why aren't they telling us what we need to know? It may be that they're incompetent and they're concealing that. It may be that actually that they've become diffident in response to the way the governors behave with them.
So it's also the maintenance of relationships.
It's how you ask a tricky question in such a way that, you know, the best I can remember governors that I've worked with, one of the best tactics to use, he would always start with something positive.
Yes.
Mike, I think this is fantastic data that we've got about this, that and that. I've just got a couple of questions.
Yes.
Rather than, why is the result in this department so bad? I mean, that's simple stuff, but when you observe governing bodies, you so often, you look at the non-verbals and you can see that when a governor gets up to ask a question, other people are stepping back and thinking, oh God, this is going to be terrible kind of stuff. But anyway, thank you. Go to the table at the back. Two people there had plenty of time to share your thoughts.
We're being particularly coy. I think we were advantaged because we were only two of us, and we were able to share quite quickly our entirely different practices, Deputy Clerk and a Governor.
Brilliant.
We addressed question 1, tool 1, yeah, that one. The common thread that runs through it was that as non-execs, we are non-execs. We don't get our hands dirty, that's for sure. We are there to challenge, as has already been said. We also identified that really in that block there is a considerable amount of work for the Quality Standards and Achievements Committee. That seems to be where that block of work gets fed through. The role of the Governor, well, some of the questions needed a little bit of polishing, like it's actually one of the questions needed the role of the board rather than the role of the Governor, and we needed to shake that a little bit. But the role of the Governor was there also to ensure the framework is in place for the college, to challenge the framework and the structure and the processes, if you like, that the processes exist. And then in the how do we know, we get that through our reports. We then went down a track together of how we construct the agendas for our committees, because that's, and it's kind of just come out from the previous speaker, saying, or what you were saying about, you know, how, when you stop getting reports. The chairs in my college are the people who create the agendas, and whereas in Catherine's college there was a different slant on that. So the active governor can sit there and just say, I want a report on this. And can I have a report on that? Now, you might get an exec director come back and go, that's 2 months' work. And I go, well, OK, we'll skip it for this meeting, but I'll have it for the next, and put it on the agenda for that, so they can't get round that. And that way you can do the challenge as well. And quite often the exec will then come back and go, do you know what, that was a nice question, because when we went rootling around for the answers, it made us realise we're not so good, or we're good, and you don't need to worry about it, and you're assured, and so on and so forth. And then just lastly, in particular on that one, because Catherine and I were in total unanimity about which was question 5, teaching and learning, develop English, mathematics and functional skills and support the achievement of learning goals and career aims. We both agreed that we should write down, persuade the lower education providers to teach the subjects properly in the first place.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, you'll have spotted that those are the Ofsted criteria, that those are the questions that they're there. But, yeah, I just pick up one really interesting point you made, which is about to what extent do governors own the agenda? And you could say own the broad agenda, but own actual agendas. I mean, how many governing bodies actually own their own away day agendas? I'm still surprised by the number of away days that are essentially delegated to senior staff for discussion. And I personally would have thought that if governors want an informal day, that really should be for them to decide what they want to do with that day. But anyway, so thank you for raising that point.
You're welcome. On the away day thing, that also got brought up with us, because our away day is when the governors go crawling all over the college, and the clerk says, you and you're in the art department, and we just go crawling all over the art department for a day. Yeah. The strategic planning day, when we go off site to talk about strategic planning and so on, that is a different away day altogether. Okay, great. I mean, it sounds to me, and thank goodness that your microphone has gone, because I was going to pick you up and say, perhaps sometimes governors do need to get their hands dirty. Just leave that as a thought. Can we come to this table, please? Could you just pass up the microphone? Thank you.
Just as a general point, we were all in agreement that an enormous amount of care and thought has clearly gone into this, and therefore it will be really useful. As a chair designate, I'm going to find it very useful. And one of the ways that I will deal with the sheer amount of quantity is, I think, by a suggestion that came up on our table of breaking it up and putting different parts of it on the agenda for every governor meeting, which I like the idea of. We tackled the tool number 1, teaching and learning, and much of what has been said came up in discussion for us. Having reached consensus very quickly about the overall role of governors in monitoring and evaluation, we then sort of got very quickly into, well, what does that look like? And how do we make that actually work? And very quickly, we've got 2 clerks and two chair here. And some really useful tips emerge just in terms of detail, actually, of how do you get governors to engage with setting really useful strategic objectives. Well, okay, we meet every year and we set the agenda for our away days. We talked a lot about walking the floor and the importance of not sitting behind closed doors in corners, but actually getting out there and getting a feel for what's going on in the college. Presentations from curricular areas to governors on a regular basis. Student lunches was a really nice tip, getting feedback from students on those. And then we arrived at finally at the sort of thorny topic which you raised for us, really, of how do you close the loop? How do you make sure that you actually are adding value in the end by saying, okay, we've gone through this process, we've ticked a box, was it useful, have we learned, have we added value?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we're doing pretty well. We've just got a couple of minutes for our last group feedback. No one seems to want to take the microphone.
Hi, we actually looked at the number 8, which was the reputation and networking of governors. And it was quite interesting, actually. We've actually got a diverse number of colleges on the table. We've got clerks and governors. And I think as a starting point, the 5 key questions were definitely one that would obviously fit all colleges. But I think what we also found out is that once you start going down the route of one question, it obviously opens up a multitude of others as well. And I think the diverse nature of that is obviously quite important. What we also picked up upon with networking, I think one thing was picked up is, are governors actually fully aware that part of maybe some of their role is to actually go out and network and actually think of, and actually sort of say to the community, stakeholders, employers, about the reputation of the college? Because I think in some colleges, if it's already been in the past history about a poor reputation, you need those governors to come in and actually say, well, no, a particular college is improving. So it's actually getting them to go out and actually put that into the community. So that was one particular focus. But I think it's also picking up, and I think someone mentioned it in another group about induction, about saying, as a role of governor, you're not there just to strategically oversee, have the oversight of the college, but it's about bringing, going out back to them and saying, look, we want you to be involved in that side of it. But I think part of that is, I think one of the key focuses, who should we be networking with and why? And I think one of the key points that one of us raised on the table is that, I raised one about competition. And I think what we've got to be mindful of is that we're all working together. We're all working in the educational sector. We all want the same outcome for learners. And what we've got to be mindful of is then we're actually working with other colleges. So yes, we might have some competition. There might be things about federations and mergers, but in essence, we are there for one purpose only. So I think that also came out reputationally, is that, there's a lot of, we're paying, charging, say, 6,000 for one, 9,000 for the fees. But in essence, we should be working more together and cohesively. So I think there is a lot with the reputation and the networking side, but I think it's just what fits one college. So I think it's a starting point. And we talked about facilitation again. That would be another area to work on. But the one thing I think as a clerk, which going through the diagnostic tools, I'm just thinking of my governors and my background. There is a lot there to actually focus on, and I think each college should look at that and go, what's my main priority, and what should I really look at as the first diagnostic tool? Because you could look at that and just frighten all your governors off with immediate effect. I'd think just very sorry, you probably would. But I think as talking to chair and principal, I think it'd be one area that I think pick one out that actually is the top priority, and then maybe work your way through.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's my thought. Anyway.
Okay. Well, look, it's 3:15. I'm really grateful. That's been extremely helpful feedback. We'll collect that. Do take these tools away with you. Work with them. And as I've said, I will be following up, and we'll be looking for some further comment. But thanks very much indeed. Did you want to say anything, Fiona? No. Great. Have a nice cup of tea. Thank you.